Good evening, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Thanks for having me back again. I'm going to talk about PowerShell 7 and maybe answer some questions, show you some things for those of you who haven't got on board and answer my question, well, what are you waiting for? So that's what we're going to look at here tonight. So PowerShell 7.2.1, that is the current shipping version of PowerShell. For those of you who've been waiting and wondering, PowerShell 7 is no longer a V1 product. You know, we've had PowerShell 7 for quite a while. If you've been waiting, thinking, okay, yeah, let's wait till Microsoft gets all the bugs out of it. Well, there's always going to be something, but it's no longer V1. So if that's what you were waiting for, you should be able to get rid of that idea and just start adopting PowerShell 7. Development for PowerShell 7 is ongoing. Right now, the cadence from Microsoft is a GA once a year and then an interim release every 6 months. So right now, we're in 7.2.1. I think the 0.1 was a quick re-release to fix a bug or something. So PowerShell 7, that's where Microsoft is spending all of their time and money. Windows PowerShell, at this point, if you didn't get the memo, you should consider it deprecated. It's not going away. It's not going to disappear. And we still have VB Script that you can run on Windows 11. And no one's been using VB Script for close to 20 years. So Windows PowerShell is not going, it's not going away, but it's no longer being developed. In fact, this also includes the PowerShell IC. You should be adopting VS Code or some other editor as your primary source of scripting and developing your PowerShell modules and that sort of thing. You can retain, and I still encourage you, I do it myself, you're still going to have Windows PowerShell because Windows PowerShell and PowerShell 7, as you hopefully know, can run side by side on the same box. So if there is something that for some reason does not run in PowerShell 7, and this was the case with PowerShell 7.1, the AppX modules, for example, would not run because there's a limitation in .NET Core. Well, fine, no big deal. I would just then hop into Windows PowerShell and use the AppX command list if I needed to. So you can retain Windows PowerShell, but you can still jump into PowerShell 7 and make that your primary shell. And that's really what I'm doing this year. I've decided that PowerShell 7 is where I'm going to spend all of my time and effort. I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to write code and say, oh, I got to make sure this works in Windows PowerShell. New stuff that I'm writing and publishing into the PowerShell gallery is probably going to be PowerShell 7.2 only, because I want to start adopting and embracing that paradigm. And I want you to do that as well. And what I want people to think about, because people, they'll ask, oh, you're running Windows PowerShell, PowerShell 7. Well, what I'm really getting at, or want you to think about, is PowerShell more as a management tool. You can upgrade PowerShell on your management desktop or jump server. Wherever you are running your PowerShell console or running your scripts from, that's the place that you need to run PowerShell 7.2. or whatever the current version of PowerShell 7 is when you get around to upgrading to it. We're not going to worry so much about the servers. Your servers, they can stay at Windows PowerShell 5.1. You don't have to upgrade everything in your environment. The only place where I encourage you to move to PowerShell 7 is on your desktop, your admin desktop where you are running and writing your code. Because you're still going to use remote management, so you use PowerShell remoting. That doesn't change. You're using remoting, right? You're not logging into servers, that sort of thing. So as long as you're using PowerShell remoting and doing all the things that we used to do and are still doing, you can still do that from a PowerShell 7 box. You can manage those Windows 5.1 servers with invoke command and enter PS session, and it's going to continue to use the WSMan protocol and the WinRM and all of that stuff. Everything we've been doing all along, that does not change. The only change is that you now have on your desktop new features in PowerShell 7 that you can use, and maybe use them with PowerShell remoting and to manage servers at scale, maybe in a different way. Now, you might want to take advantage of some of the new remoting features in PowerShell 7, which we'll talk about here. Or you may want to install PowerShell 7 on the servers if there's some feature that's in PowerShell 7 that you want to take advantage of in a remoting session. Say there's a new commandlet or a new parameter or some bug fix for a commandlet that didn't work in 5.1, but it works now in v7, and you want to run that on a remote server in a remoting session, yeah, then you might need to push that server up to PowerShell 7. But don't feel that, God, I have to upgrade all my servers. No, you don't. If you are doing some upgrades on the servers anyway, and it makes sense, hey, here's a window, let's go ahead and install PowerShell 7, you can do that because you can still have both remoting endpoints. You can have a 5.1 endpoint and the 7.2 endpoint on the same box, or you can go to SSH. Something we'll talk about a little bit later. So some other reasons why I think you should be considering, if you're not already, using PowerShell 7. There's a much better shell experience. I mean, I spend my days in a PowerShell prompt. I'm thinking some of you are using PowerShell interactively to do things in your network. PowerShell 7 adds chain operators, things that we've had in Linux and other types of shells for a long time. The ternary operator. This is kind of a developer thing, but it's something that you can, makes it easier to do, like if-else logic, but you can do it at the console. Yeah, you can do it in a script, but personally I find a if statement is just as easy to run in a script, but from the console, it saves some keystrokes. I'll show you that here if you've not seen that before. The new command like get error, Microsoft has revisited the whole error object and made it a little bit easier to work with. It's really cool stuff with ANSI rendering. I love this stuff. I'm spending a lot of time playing with this feature. Command prediction, which technically is a PS readline feature, but it really comes to play, I think, in PowerShell 7. Much better performance in PowerShell 7. A lot of you I know have heard about the dash parallel parameter with for each object. There's a new console-based progress bar in PowerShell 7.2. I'll give you a peek of that if you've not seen that before. And the usual updates to the commandlets and engines, a lot of things that Microsoft has worked on to make PowerShell 7 faster and more efficient. And certainly remoting, the big story there in PowerShell 7 is the SSH that can run cross-platform, so I can manage servers, whether they're running Linux or Mac or Windows, and use SSH. That may make some networking admins much happier because they say, oh, I never liked that when I ran that Microsoft crap. Now I can use SSH. So I'm going to jump into PowerShell, VS Code. And I'm trying to figure out the best way to do this. There's a bit.ly link, and I'll share this again later, but if you want to take note of that, grab a screen capture, whatever. My demo file I'm going to go through in VS Code. You can grab from a GitHub gist, and that link will take you to it. So I'm going to now try, come back to that, try to change and switch to VS Code, because you're still seeing, so I can stop presenting, and now go back and share. All right, so everyone should be seeing VS Code. Are we good, Mike?
Yep.
Okay. So one of the things that we have in VS Code, in PowerShell 7, there are like some new PowerShell variables that start with is. Let me just try to get my screen here. So let's do get variable is. So you could use these from the console or in your scripts to say, hey, am I running on a Windows box, on a Mac, on a Linux, or Windows? So that's kind of a handy little thing to know. If there is, of course, the PS Edition. Get my keys to work here. There we go. PS Edition for Core or PowerShell 7, you'll get Core. On Windows PowerShell, it will be desktop. And of course, the PS version table, which we all know about, and you'll see that a little bit different. I'm going to use a WSL command to get to my Ubuntu instance and look at the version table on a Linux box, because you get a little bit a slightly different look there. So you can see the platform there is Unix versus Win32NT for Windows and that sort of thing. So we have some things in PowerShell 7 that make it a little bit easier to determine, hey, what platform am I on? Good. So operators, let's look at these chain operators. Now there's a help topic I encourage you to take a look at. There are two operators, the ampersand, and then the pipe. These are things that we've had, I think, in the Linux world and in other shells for quite a while. You basically work, if this first command is successful, then run the second command after the double ampersand. So if this command is successful, now it's not like an if statement. It's just saying, did that command run? So 1 greater than 0, the fact that it's true really is irrelevant. The command completed, so getDate was able to run. So see, it doesn't matter whether it's true or false, it's that did the command complete.
So
now,
if it threw an error, it would not do the next one?
Correct. So, well, no, not if it threw an error. So let's try that here. So let's do get. Yeah, right. So it did not complete. And so getDate did not run. So it's a way of chaining operations together, which you might want to do if you have some long running things you want to run, but you don't want to sit around and wait for that first command to finish. You want to go to lunch. So I say, I'm going to chain this command. I'm going to hope that it finishes. And when it does, then I want to run another command. And you see, as I have a demo here in a second, where you can chain a bunch of these things together. So chaining, though, can affect the output. So let me create a variable here to my other laptop. And I'm going to do test WSMan. And then if it's successful, then run get volume. Now, you see the output there is kind of funky. That's not what you would normally expect. And that's because what's happening is both commands are running in the same pipeline. And so you're getting two types of objects coming through the pipeline. PowerShell doesn't understand how to properly format that, so it gives you everything in a list. The trick to that, at least for the second command, is, see, I'm piping it to out default. So if I rerun the same command, so now I get the first command and the second command, and that's a little bit nicer to look at. So that's what you're probably expecting. It's a little thing to keep in mind with the way that these chain operators work in the PowerShell pipeline. Now, if there's a failure, as we saw, if the command fails, the first command fails, if you have the ampersand, the second command is not going to run. But if you want something to run, then you can use that double pipe. So I wanted to get service foo at that in there. If it does not exist, then display oops. Now notice I get both messages because this is not an if statement. It's running both commands, or potentially running both commands. And you can chain multiple things together here. So I could basically run the test WSMan, then run get volume, and then run get sim instance, physical memory, and save each one of those to a variable. So there's the output, but see there's $A, $B, and $C. Again, could be nice if there were some long running commands that I wanted to chain together so I could then go out to work. This is not necessarily the type of operator that I would probably include personally in a script. I look at this more for actual the experience of working in the shell. Some people may find this a little more useful. And that's also true of the ternary operator. So normally we're used to, if parentheses, so if some condition is true, then we're going to run some code, else we can run some other code, or there's also else if. The ternary operator has some code that has to evaluate as true or false. Then there's a question mark. Then you run, if that is true, then we run this code, colon, false code. So if 10 is greater than 5, then we'll display yes it is. If it's not, then we'll say no it isn't. Let's see how that works. Let me clear the screen here and move this up a bit. So it's 10 less than 5. No, it isn't. So the first expression was false. So I get the code that runs after the colon. So this is a nicer, quicker way of doing a very quick if-then statement without having to use if and square brackets and all of that. So you might want to use it something like this. So if the day of the week equals Wednesday, then I'm going to run my midweek backup. Otherwise, I'm not going to do anything. It's, for me personally, I would just assume if I was putting this in a script, I'm probably going to continue to use an if statement. But if I'm doing something quick and dirty at the console, the ternary operator saves me some keystrokes and could be a little faster and easier to work with. So here is kind of a variation on the code we did before. So let me just, I should still have the variable defined. So if test wsman srv works, if that command completes, that will be implicitly true. And so if that is true, then I'll do my get volume on srv1, and this should probably be computer name, I think. Let's run that. No, it's not. I screwed up let's go back. There we go. So test wsman worked, so get volume ran. Otherwise, if it had not been around, then I would have done write warning, and that's what would have come up to the screen. So like this. So let's change to a bad server name. Same command. And now I get the warning. Again, you could easily write this with an if-else statement, but some people really like this ternary operator. And again, it can make your life a little bit easier, maybe at the console, kind of once you get familiar with the syntax of it. All right, what else do we got here? Errors. Clear screen. So there's a new commandlet called getError. This makes it much easier to display errors from the PowerShell session. Good grief. What's nice here is we get better formatting of the error object. So before, and we still have $error, that still exists. That variable hasn't changed. Still has a list of all of the errors that have happened in the same order, but I can now pipe this to get error and get a nicely formatted view of that error message. So this is really nice. I don't have to go through and try to dig into the error object to get the information that I want. I can kind of see everything I need at a glance here. I like this quite a bit. So that error object is improved. You can still, run code like this, to parse the error object into something that might be a little more meaningful. But having that get error command makes it much easier to look into the errors that you have gotten in your PowerShell session. Any questions on that? Everyone good with that? Does that look interesting to anyone? Hopefully it does. I'd like it. All right, now for the really fun stuff. PS style. This was introduced so everything I've shown you so far, we had beginning in PowerShell 7. This feature, PS styles, was introduced in 7.2. So this is a built-in variable that has ANSI settings. So we have these ANSI formatting and ANSI escape sequences that are all kind of predetermined for you. The escape character, that backtick E, only works in PowerShell 7. You can use ANSI in Windows PowerShell, but you have to use the character 27 and escape. That is the escape character that you would use. I'm not going to get into, what ANSI is and all of that, but this becomes a nice, easy way of adding some color and style to your PowerShell work, which Microsoft has done. For example, there is a section here in this variable for formatting. So you can see here there are settings for for a table header and errors and error accent and error warnings and warnings verbose and debug. Now, some of these settings will overwrite host.private data, which is what we used to use in the past, or they might be controlled by the hosting application. For example, and this is probably not going to work here. So if I run write warning, I'm getting basically the color, hopefully comes across on the screen, that you see here, that is this value, which is also the same as the yellow value in host.private data, which is really what I'm using here. Host. So host.private data, see the warning foreground color is yellow, and that's really what the yellow is here. One thing to be aware of, these colors and the way that they look may vary, especially if you're using Windows Terminal and different color schemes. So that's why it's nice to see what they look like, but you may want to change some settings where you can change them to make something a little bit easier to read based on your color scheme. Anyway, so what I'm going to say here is, let's say I want to change that formatting and I want to use a different ANSI escape sequence. So this should make it more reddish. If I rerun my write warning, see, it doesn't change. However, and I'm not going to do it because it's tedious to jump back and forth. If I were to open up the actual PowerShell session in Windows Terminal and run the same command, then I would see the difference. The integrated terminal in VS Code is defaulting to host private data. It's not taking the value in PS styles. And I don't know if that's by design or if that's a bug. I just kind of came to that conclusion the last couple of days as I was trying to get my demos to work. So depending upon the host that you are in, there may be some things that you have to work on. And my light just went out because it's 9 o'clock and that's on the timer. Not that anyone needs to see me, but I can put it back on real quickly. Maybe. Well, we'll just leave it off. No one needs it. But let's look at the table headers here. So if I do get process, you can see here, see that table header? It's in green. And that's because I have ANSI rendering turned on and it's using that green setting. I can say, you know what? I want to change that to a different ANSI setting. And now let's do get process. And now I've changed it to kind of a salmon color. So you can change little features like that to make them a little more meaningful or to pop if you want. I kind of like that.
So a question in the chat was the changing the session. Is it within that session, or can you change all the existing sessions or future sessions?
So PS style is if you make a change, like I changed to the table header. If I always want to have that, I need to put that command in a profile script. So if you make a change to the variable, it's not persistent.
Okay, cool.
Now, some of these settings, like the foreground settings and the background settings, these are hard-coded. You cannot change, for example, what the code is for black. But you can use these settings so that you don't, Microsoft added these so that you don't have to try to figure out, okay, what's the ANSI setting for magenta? If I want, I can say, you know what? I want my table header to use the background bright black. So I want to use that setting there. I don't have to know that it's 100M. All I can see that's background bright black, and just set the table header setting to that. And go back to get process. And now I've changed that table header. Again, if this is something that I want all the time, I would just put that command in my PowerShell profile. You also have the option, for example, I'm going to change the table header. There is an option to create a color from an RGB value or set of values. So now I changed it there to that nice little kind of greenish, bluish color. In fact, I like that. I might end up making that part of my profile. But this is where you have to test it, because that may look different in different color schemes based on what you're running. If you're running Windows Terminal in VS Code. I'm sorry, if you're running PowerShell in Windows Terminal. Now here's the really fun stuff. There's also a section in PS Style for file info. Now, if you will look at your PS Style file info settings, you're going to be something slightly different. I've customized mine and added to it. What happens with this is if I do a directory listing, now I get all this nice color formatting. My directories are background blue in kind of italic, XML files are in one color, PS1 files are in a different color, JSON files, CSV files. So you can add some coloring to your directory listings. This is really cool. I went through and added some additional file extensions and specified some additional colors. In order for this to work, you have to turn on the experimental feature PS ANSI rendering file info. So you enable that feature, restart PowerShell, and then all of the settings that are in file info come to life. And so every time you're in a directory and doing a directory listing, you'll get these values. And you can customize that. If you're interested in learning more about PS Style, I just had an article published a week or so ago on 4 sysops. I'll have the link here that goes into much greater detail about this and also shows you how to customize the file settings, that sort of thing. That's really fun. I'm having a lot of fun with that. And we'll come back to this too with the rep progress. So some other console experiences. There is command prediction. Oh, shoot. This, well, let's see if this will work in the PowerShell console. Now, technically, this is part of PS Readline, and you need to be running version, I think, 2.1 or later. Let's see if this will work here. So in PS Readline options, there are a couple settings. One of them is prediction source. So right now, this is set to none. And then there's also a setting for inline prediction color, which you probably cannot read. We're going to change that. So I'm going to change my PS Readline prediction source to history because I'm using the history feature in PS Readline. So let's do that. And I'm also going to use an ANSI escape sequence. Let's use the green sequence from PS Style for inline prediction. I'll show you how this is going to work, I hope. So now, here, let me go back to get PS Readline option. So now you can see that inline prediction color is a little bit easier to read. Oh, I'm also going to add a key handler that allows me to do Control F, which will advance the cursor a word at a time. And these are settings that you typically would put in your PowerShell profile script. Now, oh, good. So I just started typing dir, and you can see that the completion predicting is showing up in that green font that I specified. If I hit the right arrow key, then that jumps all the way to the end. So I just started typing a command, and then PowerShell starts finishing it. So get sim, and if I do Control F, which may not work here in the, oh, yeah, because that doesn't work in the VS Code because that keys combination is set for something else. It works fine in my terminal sessions. So it makes it very easy to go back, and I'll get an error there. So I like this inline prediction. Just want to change the color to something that makes sense. And so then I can go back. Now I'm backspacing, and see, as I'm backspacing, it's changing the color to green. So that green is not going to execute. So if I run the command now, it's just going to get me the BIOS on my local computer. That's why you want to set that inline prediction color to be something that is different than your normal font, so you can kind of tell what it is. Again, technically, this is not a PowerShell 7 feature, but it's something that you really should be taking advantage of. I just use it to death. All right, there is also a new command called Out-ConsoleGridView. In PowerShell 7, if you install the Microsoft PowerShell Console GUI Tools module, let's see, I think this will work here. So we're going to get service and pipe it to Out-ConsoleGridView.
So another question in chat is, I'm not sure exactly what he's referring to. Will it work if you switch VS Code from the PowerShell integrated console to simply using PWSH inside the terminal?
Oh, it might, but I'm all set up to be using the integrated console, so you'd have to experiment. I'm always using the integrated console, so all
right, thanks.
Because a lot of stuff I'm showing you, like the PS style and the command prediction, that's stuff that makes much more sense, and I use all the time when I'm in my Windows Terminal PowerShell session, actually running commands. If I'm in VS Code, I'm writing scripts and functions, and the integrated terminal is really just to see what is going on. So I don't necessarily use some of these features as much in VS Code as I do when I'm actually in the terminal running PowerShell, if that makes sense. So this is the console grid view. So it's a grid view, but it runs in the console. And you can select, you can come down here and you can select things, and the selecting kind of happens automatically. I'm just hitting the space bar, hit enter, and then it just automatically passes them through to the pipeline. So this is really cool. So I can say, let's do a directory of my work. The alias is OCGV. So I'm going to select some files and then compress them. Now, unfortunately, there's a little bit of a bug here, is that it picks up the ANSI escape sequences and shows them in the name, but that's fine. I can grab some files, hit enter, and then I just created the zip file based on the files that I selected from Out-ConsoleGridView. I kind of like that better than Out-GridView, because sometimes Out-GridView, you can't control how wide it gets. Because I have a really wide monitor, most of the time when I launch that, it ends up spreading across my entire 44-inch monitor, and I got to resize it. It's just a nuisance. I really like the Out-ConsoleGridView. Again, that's only a PowerShell 7 feature, and it does not work in PowerShell remoting. But that's kind of cool. All right, how are we doing on time? We okay? Let's look at progress bars. So I'm going to run a command here, and it's going to use the new progress bar in PowerShell 7. It probably won't run very long, but so you'll notice it when you see it. So there it is. So that is the new console-based progress bar. It's no longer the big screen here. That is configured with PS style. There's a progress setting. So you can specify the color, the width, and the view. The minimal view is what we just saw there. You can change that value to I believe it's classic, and then that will put it in the old style we had in Windows PowerShell 5.1. This new progress bar is much faster than the old progress bar, and just looks so much cooler. So I'm going to change the color and rerun my command. So now you can have progress without it taking up a lot of space. It also, we don't have the problem with the progress bar in 5.1 of overriding text that was used to be in your console, and it performs much faster. Now, one drawback is that you may lose some data because we no longer have the, I believe it's current operation that gets omitted, I believe, from the output. So if you have scripts that are using that, you may need to adjust your code if you want to take advantage of the new progress bar. But it's really cool, and you'll see it all the time in PowerShell 7. And then, of course, then there's for each parallel. So I'm not going to go through all of these commands. The whole point of for each parallel is that you're able to run a script block in parallel, running basically in multiple run spaces. So there's some overhead involved. Not everything runs faster just because you're running it in parallel. You really want to limit this to things that are going to take a long time to run and can run, simultaneously or in multiple run spaces. And you can throttle the number of run spaces that you kick off and that sort of thing. So I have some code here, which I'm not going to run. This script block here is basically a function, an unnamed function that's going to do a directory listing of a file, of a folder, and then print out an object that shows me how many files are in the folder, how big it is, and that sort of thing. So when I run this for about 5 locations here, that takes about 40 seconds to run. But I'm going to run it with the for each parallel. So I have my commands, and we scroll over here. So for each object dash parallel, I'm going to run the script block, and I basically took my script block and pasted it in here. So let's run this. And in my script block, I have a write host that's going to have a timestamp and show you what it's doing. So I've begin measuring the path and then end measuring the path. So you can see I spun up basically a run space, or PowerShell spun up a run space for work, scripts, temp, my docs folder, and Windows. And then if you look at the end write host, you can see that they are ending at different times, and it's finishing up during the Windows directory right now, which should just take another moment. And this should run about half the time. At least it has been in my testing. All right, so that didn't run that much faster. Now, in this particular case, the other thing I have going against me potentially is disk contention or other things going on my system. But here I have another example. This works a little bit better. I think I can actually run this for real. So I'm going to query. So I'm going to run get win event, and I want to query the system event log for errors and warnings. But I'm going to get the last 100 events. Now, get win event, the computer name only takes one computer name at a time. I don't want to go through each one and wait for it to finish. If I do this way, this isn't too bad. It should take about 5 seconds. That's not going to work because for some reason, I'm losing my authentication to my machines. But so I'm not even going to bother with the second one. I do know when I was setting this all up, the old way took about 5 seconds. The new way using for each parallel took about 2 seconds. So it took about half the amount of time. So that's very nice. The last thing I wanted to show you was SSH remoting. Now for this, I will have to jump to the PowerShell console because let's see here. Well, you know what? I'm going to try, since someone suggested it, I'm going to try seeing if I can do a new terminal. That's Windows PowerShell. All right, so let's see if I can do. All right, so I'm in PowerShell 7.2.1. I may have just to copy and paste. All right.
Let's not forget about talk about that calendar later.
Oh. So let's see if this will work. So Wilma is an Ubuntu machine on my network. All right, so cool. All right, that worked. So I am now logged in to an Ubuntu box. Take these off because I can't hear. So I'm running PowerShell 7 on Ubuntu, and I'm SSH'd into it. So I'm just going to exit. We'll come back and do some other things here in a moment. I'm going to create, since I know we're running time here, I'm going to create another existing session to a Fedora box. Now, the reason
somebody asked a question saying, do you need to modify the shell to use PowerShell instead of Bash, or does PowerShell 7?
Yeah, there is some setup that you need to do on the Linux side to configure so that when you make the connection via SSH, it knows to open up PowerShell. Yeah,
Okay,
I'm not. Yeah. There is setup that you have to do. I'm not going to. We'll get sidetracked trying to. That's a whole other presentation on how to set this all up. And for my Linux boxes, like the Fedora box, I didn't get prompted for a password because I had got SSH keys set up for that particular server. Otherwise, it would have prompted me for credentials. In fact, that's what it's going to do here. Server 1 is actually a Windows 2016 box that I set up PowerShell 7 and installed SSH. So this is asking me for credentials. Hopefully I didn't screw that up. And then I'm going to create a bunch of other sessions to boxes using Windows PowerShell remoting. And you can kind of see there, you see the transport. So I'm going to create a variable $all equals get. Right, so you can see I have multiple connections. Some are SSH, some are WSMan, and you can see that some of them are connected. You can see where they're connected to. So let's now try this. I can run invoke command. So that is the get process that's running on all those machines. So I can see, so you can see the boxes connected via SSH. I'm actually connected to the PWSH, that's the PowerShell 7 executable. The WSMan boxes are connected to the WSMan Prov host service. That's what handles the connection with PowerShell remoting. So let's do something. So hopefully you're catching on here. I'm running a command that is running on both Windows boxes and Linux boxes. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to install a module on all those machines. Now for my Windows boxes, I need to make sure that because they're running server 2016, I need to configure the TLS stuff. Otherwise the PowerShell get commands won't work properly. And I'm going to install, let's see if this will work. So I'm going to install the PS function info module that I wrote. It's up on the PowerShell gallery. I've blogged about it recently. So now on my Windows boxes and on the Linux, on a Fedora box, it will go through and PowerShell is now installing, there's the right progress, using the PowerShell 7 stuff. Should take just another moment. There we go. And then to verify. So there we go. Now you can see if you look at the directory, the Windows boxes put that in the Windows PowerShell modules directory. The PowerShell 7 box, like server 1, even though it's running Windows, it's running SSH, and I connected to PowerShell 7 on it, and so it installed in the PowerShell 7 directory, which is PowerShell and those modules. So when you're doing this kind of cross-platform remoting, you do have to take into account and add logic to your code to verify that you can do everything that you want to do. For example, get sim instance doesn't run on Linux boxes, but it would run in the server 1 box. That would be fine, even though I'm connected via SSH. Having that kind of flexibility, I think, is really cool to be able to remote into other things. And of course, you can also, once you have SSH set up, you can just connect SSH and then start PowerShell. You can always do that as well. Any other questions on the SSH feature for those of you who have not seen that? Yeah, there's like a whole other presentation on getting this all set up and the do's and don'ts and that sort of thing. but I will.
No, I think it's pretty good. No other questions.
All right. So there is a free ebook. Well, I have the notes here on PowerShell 7 that was written by a bunch of people in the PowerShell community. I think Mike, don't you have a chapter in this?
Yeah, I think I wrote about select string.
Oh, right. And your wife did the cover.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if you go to the leanpub.com/PS7 now, technically the book is free, but we're hoping you might consider a donation, which goes to the on-ramp programs for PowerShell.org. But if you want to know more about some of the new features in PowerShell 7, that is a book that you can use or get. All right, so let me go back to the slides. So I've stopped presenting. And all right, so I'm just going to leave. I'm not going to go into full screen. I'm just going to leave the slide here and kind of answer some questions or ask the question for those of you, what's holding you back? For those of you who are not running PowerShell 7, what is the roadblock, or what is the perceived roadblock? Maybe I can answer that or get you pointed in the right direction.
I think it's just stuff I have to install PowerShell 7 on my deployment machines. I'm an endpoint guy, so it's not that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, again, you can install PowerShell 7 side by side. It has its own execution policy. It has its own remoting endpoints. Now, there are some things that we don't have in PowerShell 7, like there's no GIA, DSC, which is being worked on. I think GIA might be being worked on, but you still have Windows PowerShell for those things if you need them. Or maybe everyone's already using PowerShell 7 and or
If we're running Windows PowerShell today, and we have a handful of modules installed, is there an easy way? Is it just a matter of copying the modules over to the proper place for PowerShell 7 to be
you
able
shouldn't
to?
have. No, that's a good question. So you should not have to. If you install a PowerShell module in Windows PowerShell, you should be able to see it in PowerShell 7.
Okay.
Because in PowerShell 7, it should still be looking at the PS default module or whatever the environmental variable is, which has the location for your Windows PowerShell modules. So one thing I do still do, if I make sense here, is if I'm installing a new module from the PowerShell gallery, I'll install it in Windows PowerShell so I have it in both cases in case I need it in both cases. The only time you really need to install something in PowerShell 7 is if you have a module that will only install in PowerShell 7. Otherwise, you shouldn't have to do anything. And PowerShell has a trick with some modules where if there's a Windows PowerShell module that doesn't quite work in PowerShell 7, PowerShell will automatically set up an implicit remoting session to yourself and kind of access the module through the back door through a remoting channel on your own machine. So there are some clever things that it does for compatibility to access those older modules so that you can still run them in being in a PowerShell 7 session. So that's a good question.
Thank you. I have one other question too, and technically a comment. As far as I know, Office 365 modules, I believe Exchange Online module now supports PowerShell 7. I know the newest one does. Do you know if any of the other ones like the Azure AD or Teams also support it yet?
I do not know. I don't.
Okay.
You could ask on, post something on Twitter or post in the forums at PowerShell.org. I'm just sitting in my desk in upstate New York, so I have no real need for Office 365 or all that fancy cloud stuff you young kids play with.
It was actually what introduced me to it, and kind of kicking and screaming a few years ago. And I'm really glad that it did. But a majority, I wouldn't say a majority. Well, yeah, a majority of what I use it for is administration of that stuff. It's way faster than using the web portals that
Oh yeah, yeah,
up every kind of in seconds.
yeah, and then you can automate it. That's the whole point.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, don't sound like there are a lot of other questions. I mean, you're always welcome to find me on Twitter. So I'm on Twitter. It's at Jeff Hicks. If you don't already know that, there's the link for the LeanPub book. I should have put the link for the GitHub thing. Hopefully someone grabbed that. My blog, my GitHub repo, which all my modules are up there. Phil talked about, looking at GitHub code. So you're more than welcome to browse through the variety of stuff that I have there. And then the last thing, just to let people know about something new that I've started this year, is I have a kind of a premium newsletter on Substack that is subscription based, that I'm writing about 3 or 4 articles a month that are really deep dive into the culture of PowerShell, and not so much, necessarily how to do something, but why you should do it using PowerShell. And so that if that's something that might interest you, you could try for a month, or there are free subscriptions you can sign up for, but you won't get the full experience. But that's something that I have out there, so I want you to be aware of it. Any other questions? Was this helpful, Phil, Mike?
Oh, there you go. Back on the mute. Yeah, I think it was good. I think the community can certainly come offline, unmute, and talk. I think it was good. I think everybody gets value out of it. Those who have seen it before and those who haven't. So I think it's good. Thanks for presenting, Jeff.
Is there an easy way to see some of the new things that are added into the various modules that pre-exist? Like get date, for example, -UTC didn't exist in PowerShell 5, was introduced at some point in PowerShell 7. Super easy thing that.
Yeah, no. There used to be, someone used to keep a change log of what was new and changed.
So we try
PowerShell 7.
we try to put that kind of information in the release notes. I put a link in the chat.
Yeah, I was just looking at an easy way to do it, like about help or directly.
Because there's no way to discover that information within the PowerShell engine itself.
No. I mean, some of the commandlets have help that will say, this command was introduced in PowerShell 6, for example.
Yeah, I've tried to update the docs to say when a commandlet or a parameter was added, and or when some behavior changed throughout all of the docs. It's pretty complete, but you have to look through the docs.
Well, the best thing to do is just make sure you're running the latest version of PowerShell, and then it's all moot, right?
Right.
Oh, but if you don't know,
and the latest module as well.
Yeah, I think to Clem's point, yes, if you don't know it's there and you've been doing it, and then all of a sudden a new parameter arrives in the new version, you're like, I didn't even know it was existed.
Well, okay, so that comes back. I'm always telling people, read the help, even for commands that you think you know, because there may be an example that maybe you didn't recognize before, didn't realize it was there, or didn't register with you, and it says, oh, well, that solves my problem. Or you discover, oh, there's a new parameter. For example, in PowerShell 7, there are new parameters to convert to HTML. So you're right, if you don't go and look at that commandlet and look at the help, you won't discover that. And they may be things that you need. So as you are working on your code, say, you know what, I haven't looked at the help. First of all, update the help. And say, I haven't looked at the help for, convert to HTML in a while. Let's see if there's anything new. That's just a habit you have to get into.
So Jeff,
that's
real
my
quick
opinion.
question.
Yeah.
Is there any plan that you know of to make PowerShell 7 the standard install on, say, the next version of Windows 11 or the next version of Server or anything like that? I mean, that really kickstarted PowerShell 5 across the community.
Yeah, I know. My understanding, I don't know anything for a fact, and even if I did, I'd probably be under NDA. My understanding is that it's very difficult to tie stuff to the operating system these days at Microsoft. And I think that the PowerShell team would like PowerShell to be kind of a separate option that people can decide what they want to install, where they want to install it. They kind of did that with help, right? So you no longer get the full help when you install on a new PowerShell install. You have to go and update the help. And I think that it's the same logic for the engine. They don't want necessarily to make PowerShell 7 the default, or add it to be the default.
The PowerShell team
that could change, but my understanding is, the way that Microsoft is approaching operating systems just makes it really difficult to get stuff in like PowerShell. I mean, it's not part of the store. I mean, the PowerShell team is making it really easy for you to get it any way you can. You can use my PS Release Tools module. It's another option to quickly install it. But I would not expect to see it as a automatically installed on the next version of Windows 11. Windows Server, maybe I could see a use case where a situation where that might happen, but I doubt we'll see it on Windows 11. But it's easy enough to install. You can also install it if you've got WinGet. You can also install PowerShell 7 and the PowerShell preview also through WinGet. And chocolatey.
Well, I think Sean's comment about how they're working to get it into the as an installed feature, and that's where my frustration is that hey, they're still pulling along PowerShell 5 is like the base install. I understand that there's a faster cadence, but at least some version of it. It's the latest version as of X date. That's what you get by default, and you have to do an automatic update, and it'll just take automatic updates. But the fact that Windows 5.1 is there on Server 2022.
But see, here's the other problem is that we're on a different cadence now.
No, I understand that. So what was Sean saying something?
Well, with Windows PowerShell and let's say back when Microsoft was releasing operating systems every 3 years, and we didn't get a new release of PowerShell, every other year. So the fact that you could put it in the operating system be fine. But if Microsoft added PowerShell 7 to say Windows Server 20, whatever the current version is, 2022, if they did that today, at the end of the year, those people who are running those machines, they would then have to go and update version 7. Or if someone was installing a new version or a new install of Windows Server, they get the old version and then they have to immediately turn around and update it to the new version. Whereas if they just install Windows Server and then install the pieces that they want to add, like PowerShell 7, and then they're getting the latest version.
Yeah.
And I think that fits more with the open source mentality in the Linux world. They've always sort of had that parallelism where you can have multiple versions of a given thing.
Yeah, and you only install what you need. And I understand the concern, and a lot of people feel that it would be easier if it was already there, but you all know how to script PowerShell, and the installation mechanisms for installing PowerShell 7 are all incredibly scriptable, except for maybe winget. And it's not that hard. We all know how to deploy software to servers, so that's not, black magic or anything.
All right. All right. Well, any other questions? I'm gonna at least turn off the
Stop
recording and then
presenting.
we can go to after hours. What?
Nope, I stopped
Oh, that's what
presenting.
you said. All right. Well, again, thanks everybody for coming, and we're gonna kind of take this. It's the after party is gonna begin. But thanks everybody for coming, and remember, in 2 weeks we are going to have Jeremy Brown. He's going to do a discussion on Azure Graph, where he's doing Azure stuff, and then talk about PowerShell module with Microsoft Graph, and he's looking for some examples and stuff like that. So he's working on that. And then in a couple of weeks, we'll actually have Automator on. So we have some good things coming up in the lineup. And if you certainly do want to speak with us, let us know, and we can get some topics. There are topics that you're looking for that you haven't seen, or you want to have a speaker reach out to us, let us know, and we'll certainly engage with them. And so thanks everybody. Have a good night.